Jean Tierney's stunning beauty once graced magazine covers and movie screens across America, but beneath that polished exterior lurked a darkness that would ultimately shatter her Hollywood dreams. The star who captivated audiences in films like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven found herself trapped in a nightmare of severe depression and bipolar disorder that no amount of fame could cure. The 1950s brought a cascade of personal tragedies that pushed Tierney to her breaking point. Her daughter Daria was born with severe developmental disabilities after Tierney contracted German measles during pregnancy, a devastating blow that haunted the actress for years. The relentless pressures of stardom, combined with this profound grief, created a perfect storm of mental anguish that even Hollywood's golden facade couldn't hide. Tierney's condition deteriorated rapidly, leading to multiple hospitalizations and brutal shock therapy treatments that were considered standard care at the time. These sessions left her disoriented and struggling to remember basic details about her own life and career. The woman who once commanded the screen with such poise now battled to maintain her grip on reality. In 1955, at what should have been the height of her career, Tierney made a decision that stunned the entertainment industry. She walked away from it all. Her abrupt withdrawal left studios scrambling and fans bewildered, creating a void in Hollywood's roster of leading ladies that few could fill. But Tierney's story didn't end in darkness. Decades later, she emerged as an unlikely champion for the mental health awareness, courageously sharing her experience in her 1979 autobiography. Her candid revelations had helped break down stigmas surrounding mental illness, transforming her from a fallen star into a beacon of hope for countless others fighting similar battles. The twisted metal and shattered glass on Sunset Boulevard that night in May 1956 marked more than just a car accident. It became the dividing line between Montgomery Clift's meteoric rise and his tragic descent into obscurity. The crash left the 35-year-old actor's once perfect features severely damaged, requiring extensive reconstructive surgery that could never fully restore what had been lost. Clift's face, which had launched him to stardom in films like Red River and A Place in the Sun, now bore the permanent scars of that fateful evening. But the visible damage paled in comparison to the invisible torment that followed. Chronic pain became his constant companion, radiating through his jaw and skull with relentless intensity that no amount of medical intervention could completely eliminate. Desperation drove him toward a dangerous cocktail of prescription painkillers and alcohol, creating a dependency that spiraled beyond his control. What began as legitimate medical treatment transformed into a destructive cycle that affected every aspect of his professional life. Directors noticed his erratic behavior, missed lines, and unpredictable performances that once had been marked by methodical precision. Studio executives, who had once courted Clift as Hollywood's next great leading man, began viewing him as a liability rather than an asset. Insurance companies balked at covering productions featuring the increasingly unreliable actor, making him virtually unemployable for major studio pictures. By the early 1960s, the roles that came his way were sparse and often beneath his considerable talents. The transformation was complete. The promising young actor, who had revolutionized screen acting with his naturalistic approach, found himself relegated to the margins of an industry that had once celebrated his every performance. His career effectively ended by 60 seconds of twisted steel and broken dreams. Judy Holiday's razor-sharp wit and comedic brilliance earned her an Academy Award in 1951 for Born Yesterday, making her one of Hollywood's most beloved funny women. With her squeaky voice and quick mind, she seemed destined for a long career filled with laughter, but fate intervened. At the height of her success in 1960, Holiday was diagnosed with breast cancer, a devastating blow that transformed her from a source of joy to someone fighting for her life. The aggressive treatments that followed, including surgery and radiation, drained her energy and dulled the sparkle that had made her a star. Each session left her weaker, robbing her of the rapid-fire delivery and vivacity that had conquered both Broadway and Hollywood. Studios that once clamored for her talent could only watch as Holiday grew too frail to work. Rumors suggest lucrative offers continued to arrive, but she no longer had the stamina to accept them. By 1963, the actress who had outwitted every leading man on screen was forced to step away from the spotlight, unable to charm her way past an opponent she couldn't defeat. When Holiday died in June 1965 at just 43, Hollywood lost more than a gifted actress. It lost a comedic genius whose full potential was never realized. Her legacy endures as a reminder of both her extraordinary talent and the cruel brevity of her career. John Garfield's intense performances in films like Body and Soul and The Postman Always Rings Twice made him one of Hollywood's most compelling stars, but a congenital heart murmur had shadowed him since childhood. This hidden vulnerability followed him through his rise in the 1940s, always threatening to cut his career short. The Red Scare of the early 1950s turned Garfield's precarious health into a crisis. Targeted by the House Un-American Activities Committee for his political associations, Garfield faced relentless stress defending his reputation and career. Biographers suggest that the anxiety from congressional hearings, public scrutiny, and industry blacklisting placed unbearable strain on his already weak heart. As the blacklist tightened, Garfield's health rapidly declined. The once vigorous actor began suffering from chest pains, shortness of breath, and fatigue that made daily life a struggle. Studio executives who had once vied for his talent now saw him as an unreliable investment. By 1952, the combined weight of political persecution and cardiac decline had ended Garfield's ability to work. The actor known for his raw, authentic emotion was too frail to meet Hollywood's demands. On May 21, 1952, Garfield's heart finally gave out under the accumulated stress, and he died at just 39. His death stands as a tragic example of how both medical fragility and political hysteria can rob cinema of its brightest talents, cutting short a career defined by naturalistic power and emotional honesty. Deanna Durbin's angelic voice and wholesome charm turned Universal Studios from a struggling B-movie operation into a financial powerhouse during the late 1930s, with her musical films generating the revenue that literally saved the company from bankruptcy. The Canadian-born teenager became America's sweetheart almost overnight, but the relentless demands of stardom began eating away at her mental health like acid on metal. By her early 20s, the pressure of carrying an entire studio on her shoulders had, according to later accounts, transformed the once bubbly performer into what many described as an anxious, exhausted version of her former self. Some suggest that every script approval, every publicity appearance, every recording session felt like another weight added to an already overwhelming burden. Reports indicate that the girl who had enchanted audiences with her effortless performances now struggled with what appeared to be severe anxiety that made even simple conversations feel daunting. The breaking point came in 1949 when Durbin shocked the entertainment industry by announcing her immediate retirement at just 27 years old. While other stars might have taken a brief hiatus or scaled back their commitments, Durbin chose the nuclear option, complete withdrawal from the spotlight that had made her famous. Universal executives made considerable efforts to persuade their biggest moneymaker to reconsider, but her decision remained firm. Within months of her final film, Durbin had relocated to France with her husband, creating an ocean of distance between herself and the Hollywood machine that had consumed her youth. Unlike stars who retired but remained accessible to the press, Durbin became a fortress of privacy, refusing every interview request and turning down reportedly lucrative comeback offers. Susan Peters' Oscar nomination for Random Harvest in 1942 marked her as one of Hollywood's brightest young stars. At just 23, she was seen as a future A-lister, praised for her dramatic talent and natural beauty. But her promising career was derailed on New Year's Day, 1945, when an accidental shooting during a duck hunting trip with her husband Richard Quine left her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. The actress who once moved gracefully across sets now faced life in a wheelchair, with doctors telling her she would never walk again. Refusing to give up, Peters made a courageous comeback, turning to radio dramas where her voice could still shine. She later starred in the short-lived television series Miss Susan, becoming one of the first major stars to openly acknowledge her disability on screen. Despite her determination, the chronic pain from her injuries was relentless. The daily physical agony, combined with the emotional trauma of losing her career, gradually wore down her spirit. Depression became her greatest struggle as she watched her once bright future slip away. By 1952, after 7 years of battling both physical and emotional pain, Peters' health had deteriorated. On October 13th, she died at just 31, officially from kidney failure. Her story remains a poignant example of resilience in the face of tragedy, and a reminder of how quickly Hollywood's brightest hopes can be extinguished by forces beyond their control. Veronica Lake's iconic peekaboo hairstyle made her one of World War II's most recognizable pinups, but behind the glamorous image was a woman struggling with alcoholism and personal demons that would ultimately destroy her career. The star of Sullivan's Travels in This Gun for Hire was, according to biographers, consuming dangerous amounts of alcohol daily, using it to escape the mounting pressures of fame. By the late 1940s, Lake's drinking had shifted from a private habit to a public problem. Studio executives grew frustrated with her unpredictable behavior, missed rehearsals, forgotten lines, and explosive confrontations with directors who once praised her talent. Colleagues watched her transform from a consummate professional into someone erratic and self-destructive. Once a top-billed actress, Lake soon became persona non grata at major studios. Paramount, the studio that made her a star, quietly declined to renew her contract, ending her reign as a leading lady in her mid-20s. Other studios followed, and Lake was left scrambling for smaller roles in B pictures that paid a fraction of her former salary. By the early 1950s, the actress who had once graced magazine covers worldwide had vanished from Hollywood, retreating into obscurity as her health declined. Lake spent her final decades working menial jobs in New York City, serving drinks to patrons unaware they were being waited on by a former movie star. Her story remains a cautionary tale of how fame, addiction, and Hollywood's unforgiving nature can erase even the brightest talents. Frances Farmer's meteoric rise in Hollywood during the late 1930s marked her as a promising talent, with acclaimed roles in Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range showcasing her versatility. Her intelligence and fierce independence set her apart, but some biographers suggest these same traits contributed to the volatility that would overshadow her career. By 1942, Farmer's erratic behavior and public outbursts escalated, leading to a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia and forced commitment to psychiatric facilities. She endured harsh treatments, including insulin shock therapy, a controversial procedure that induced comas and often caused lasting cognitive damage, reflecting the crude state of mental health care at the time. Once a top-billed actress, Farmer spent most of the 1940s confined to psychiatric hospitals, vanishing from the film world that had once celebrated her. Her absence allowed audiences to forget her, while new stars took the spotlight, making a comeback nearly impossible. When she was finally released and tried to rebuild her career in the 1950s, the stigma of mental illness and the effects of her treatments made success elusive. Farmer's later attempts to return to acting were hampered by public perception and the years lost to institutionalization. Her story became a symbol of Hollywood's callousness towards stars with mental health struggles, showing how quickly the industry could abandon those in need. She died in 1970 at age 56, her potential largely unrealized. Her fate a tragic example of what might have been if modern mental health care had been available. Alan Ladd's rise to leading man status in the 1940s, solidified by Shane, seemed unstoppable, but chronic insomnia was already undermining his health and career. His sleeplessness was severe and relentless, leaving him pacing his Beverly Hills home at 3 a.m, desperate for rest that never came naturally. His wife Sue Carroll watched as Ladd turned to a dangerous mix of prescription sedatives and alcohol, each meant to counteract the effects of the other in a destructive cycle. The pills brought grogginess on set, while alcohol only deepened his depression and paranoia. Paramount executives, aware of his struggles, prioritized their investment over his well-being, pressuring him to maintain his tough guy image while he battled debilitating mental health issues in private. By the late 1950s, Ladd's on-set behavior had become erratic, with forgotten lines, missed cues, and trouble concentrating. Once a top-billed star, he was relegated to smaller roles as his reputation for unreliability spread. His 1962 hospitalization, after what many saw as a deliberate overdose, marked the start of his final withdrawal from Hollywood. Biographers argue that the pressures that made Ladd a star, relentless schedules, public scrutiny, and constant performance demands, were the same forces that destroyed him. On January 29, 1964, Ladd was found dead from an accidental mix of sedatives and alcohol at age 50, his career and life tragically cut short by the insomnia that had haunted him for decades. Dorothy Dandridge's 1954 Oscar nomination for Carmen Jones made her the first African-American woman to compete for Best Actress, a historic achievement that should have opened doors. Instead, Hollywood's systemic racism trapped her career. Studios refused to cast her in leading roles, fearing that pairing her with white male leads would alienate Southern audiences and hurt box office returns. As the 1950s went on, Dandridge was caught in an impossible bind. Too light-skinned for traditional black roles, too black for mainstream white parts. This left her with few opportunities, and the roles she was offered were often demeaning stereotypes or exotic temptresses, reducing her talent to physical appeal. Financial pressures mounted as film contracts disappeared, forcing her into low-paying nightclub gigs that barely covered her debts and lifestyle. Professional rejection led to a spiral of depression and alcoholism, which friends described as worsening through the late 1950s. Dandridge withdrew from Hollywood circles, missed auditions, and her erratic behavior further damaged her reputation. Her marriage to Jack Dennison in 1959 brought brief hope, but financial and personal troubles soon followed. By the early 1960s, Dandridge was performing in small venues for modest fees, her confidence shattered by years of industry neglect and personal setbacks. A foot injury mentioned in her autopsy may have contributed to her withdrawal from public life. On September 8, 1965, Dandridge died at age 42 from an accidental substance-related incident, her pioneering legacy overshadowed by a tragic decline that reflected both personal struggles and Hollywood's failure to support her talent. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.